I am rolling.
The date is January 17th, 1996. The survivor is Rene Hammond. Renee Koningsberg was her name at birth. The interviewer is Judith Richardson Hames. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the United States, and the language is English. Get off while I go to the chair and take. I'm Judith Richardson Hames. Today is January 17th, 1996. I am interviewing Rene Hammond in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the United States. We will be conducting this interview in English. Mrs. Hammond, can you please spell your name and state your name?
Rene Hammond, Hammond.
And your name at birth?
It was Königsberg, Konigsberg.
And did you have any nicknames?
Yeah, I did have a nickname.
If you will say it and spell it, please.
They called me Pippi.
And spell it, please.
P-I-P-I.
May I have your date of birth?
December 25, 1925.
Your age today?
Is 70.
And will you please state and spell the place in which you were born?
I was born in Užhorod, Czechoslovakia. Later it was Ungvar, Hungary.
And if you'll spell that, please.
Užhorod is U-Z-H-O-R-O-D.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
We're going.
Just tell me when.
Go ahead.
Can you tell me what your life was like in Užhorod in Czechoslovakia as a child?
It's kind of hard to go back that far. The earliest I can remember when I was going to kindergarten. From then we went to elementary school, and our home life was, I would say, a typical Jewish family with a very devoted mother and father. I had a brother and a sister.
Were they older or younger?
My sister is younger, my brother is older. I would consider it a very happy childhood.
Can you describe your home for me?
It was a comfortable home with modern conveniences, which means running water in the house, and kept nice. My mother was a good housekeeper, and she had help to keep it nice.
Was it in a city or
It
in
was
the country?
on the outskirts of the city. Užhorod was a fairly nice, it was like the biggest city in that area, which was the Carpathia. And Užhorod was the capital of the Carpathia. So it was fairly big with a big Jewish population.
Did you attend synagogue regularly?
My father did, and my mother went on holidays. I don't remember if women did not go other than when the big holidays were, like on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I don't remember what other holidays she went, but my father went, I think, every day in the morning before he went to work. And he went, like, I remember Friday nights, he'd go to services, and when he came home, then we had the traditional Friday night dinner.
What did you have?
Usually, most of the time, it was like an appetizer, which could have been gefilte fish, or kind of like a dish with livers and onions, and then we had chicken soup as a rule, and chicken and dessert, and we always, Friday was a big day to bake the challah and the pastries. Like there was a typical coffee cake that we had every Saturday morning, and
And you were Orthodox?
yes, my parents were Orthodox, and we followed and did everything they did. In fact, it was sometimes difficult because my friends were not Orthodox. So I'd go to my friends for a lunch, and if I ate meat before, then I couldn't accept something that had butter on it.
Ah, yes.
But they learned not to give it to me. They'd give me something else that was, didn't have the dairies in it.
Tell me about your friends. What kind of people were they?
My closest friend lived not too far from us. She naturally was a very nice girl. Her father was a doctor. He was the chief of the hospital. Because of that, they were not taken away from home at the same. They were taken from their house, but on the hospital grounds where they got a little house to live in. I had the opportunity to go from this holding camp in over to see them, and I don't know what happened to them after.
What other friends did you have? Did you have German friends, Gentiles?
Oh, Gentiles, yes. When we were going to the Czech schools and the Hungarian schools, it was mixed. We had all religions, and some of the girls were my friends. In fact, one of the girls, when we were in the holding camp, came and brought food to us, even though she could have gotten into trouble about it. She came, and I don't remember what she brought, but it was a dish of food to help us out.
Your father had a furniture store. Did you ever go and work with him in the store?
There was one year that I helped his bookkeeper, and during the summer when I didn't have school. In fact, he paid me for it, and I never spent it because it was the only money that I actually earned, and I couldn't decide what to buy for it.
What did you do as a young girl in town before the war? What were some of your activities?
Oh, well, we were quite busy in school. We had a lot of friends that we used to meet, and we had dances. We just get together and go for walks. We used to go pick flowers. There was a big field with the poppy flowers and the blue, I guess they are called cornflowers, and the daisies, and we used to make up beautiful bouquets of it and bring home. We used to go swimming in the summer. There was one swimming pool in town where I learned to swim.
And you were a painter?
And my hobby was drawing. It was portrait drawing. I used to spend hours just, my favorite subjects were movie stars. Occasionally I had to do, my father brought home a picture of a niece, a baby that he wanted me to draw. And I did that. And it was just, I would say, knowing what teenagers do here, we were the same as an average teenager.
When were you first aware of any danger?
During after the Czechs moved out of Uzhhorod, and it became Hungary. And I remember my father would listen to the news all the time. He had to close the doors and windows because it was not allowed to listen to any outside broadcasting, and he used to listen to the BBC. And then I remember his friends would come and want to know his opinion, what he thought, how things are going with the war. And they were quite aware of what was happening in Germany. I used to hear them talk about it quietly. We did not, my friends and I, we did not discuss politics too much. We were unaware that the things that were happening in Germany could actually happen to us. It was so far away that we didn't see the danger or didn't think about it. I think my father did and my mother did, but they didn't burden us with any of the details of what was happening.
Was there any time when your Gentile friends began to treat you differently?
Well, after it became Hungary, I'm trying to figure what year it was. I was in the 6th year of the gymnasium, and which would be 11 years here, the 11th grade. And we had to change schools. I had 3 more years to go, but no Jewish children were allowed to go to the school that we went to the Hungarian gymnasium. And that was the year that we transferred to the Hebrew gymnasium. That was also the year that my father had word that all the men that were born in the Slovak part of the country would be taken back to the Slovakia. And I remember the whole family at that point, we went to Budapest. So we wouldn't be home if they did come, in fact, to take him. And we spent a few weeks in Budapest, and then he got word that it's all over and we could come home. So we went home, and we were home till 1944 then. As far as the friends, the ones that were friends were still friends. But as far as noticing anti-Semitism, there always was some. When I went to Czech schools, occasionally I would hear not a very nice remark about to some of the kids about being Jewish.
What kind of remarks were they?
Stinking Jew. I remember one particular boy that wasn't liked by the teacher, and she would make these remarks occasionally. She was a Slovak. And so there was anti-Semitism.
Were you aware of any neighbors that were anti-Semites?
I personally don't think so.
When did you first notice that the family was in trouble?
Well, basically, when the Germans started, when they were retrieving from Russia, they came through Hungary, and that's when our trouble started. Up until that point, I really couldn't say that we had a bad life. So up until 1944, when the Germans came, is when our trouble started, where they started putting out laws that, like, well, I think it was before that a Jewish household couldn't have a non-Jewish employee. When we had to change schools because we couldn't go to a non-Jewish school. And when it got really bad is when the Germans came, and we had to put on a star. And we had a curfew where we couldn't be out after a certain hour. So we were confined basically to our homes. And was shortly after that we started seeing these transports coming from the villages on horse-drawn buggies, where they were bringing them through the town into the different holding camps where they were holding them until they would take them to Auschwitz. And we knew that we would be when they get done with them, that they would take us too from home. But as far as we knew, we were going to labor camps. They said we'd go where the labor was needed and we'll be treated right. And I believed it.
Did they tell you you would be kept together as a family?
Yes, yes.
Did they tell you what would happen to your home and belongings while you were gone?
They told us that we can take with us whatever we can carry. And I don't remember what was said about our belongings at home or our homes.
Did you have other relatives, grandparents or cousins that lived close to you so that you had
Well,
family members with you?
The last few months my grandmother lived with us. She came to visit and just stayed with us. And when we were taken from home, she was at the hospital and she stayed at the hospital. So we really don't know when she was deported to the camps.
Tell me what you remember about the last couple of days while you were still at home.
The last couple of days we were getting ready to go to these labor camps, getting heavy shoes that would keep us warm, getting our clothes together that would be most essential in a place, in a labor camp, and foods that we could take with us. It was just preparing for the trip that we were going to make.
What was the atmosphere in home?
It was very sad. We had a dog, and she used to howl for days before we were taken from home. Excuse me.
What time of year was this?
That was in the spring of 1944. The night before we were taken away from home, she ran away. Like she knew what was going to happen to us.
What happened to your mother right before you were taken?
That was after we were in the holding camp. It seems like somebody reported us that we did not hand over all our jewelry that my mother had.
Can you
So
tell
they
me
took-
about that before you tell me about your mother? What was it that you had to hand over and to whom?
Well, it seems like the jewelry that we had to give up to the, it was Hungarians that were handling it. I know that my parents did hide jewelry. We had in the yard we had a well for the water, and I remember they dropped boxes with jewelry into it, because I guess they knew that if we take it with us, it would not be ours. And I guess we hope that we're coming back, so it would be there when we come back. So when we got to the camp and there was not that much jewelry that we had with us, somebody reported that we had a lot more, and they took my mother. And they beat her.
They took her from
Took
your
her
home.
Yes, not
the
from
ca-
the
at
home,
the
from
camp.
from the camp. And tried to make her tell them where the jewelry was. And they kicked her, and she was bruised and in bad shape when she got back.
Who was it that beat her?
It was actually the Hungarian, they called them gendarmes. It was like a police department that were at that time already working with the Germans.
How old was she then?
She was 48.
And they threw her out of the car? Just
I
when they
don't
brought her
remember
back?
that part. I think so. And like I say, she was bruised badly.
And this
And
was in Gluck?
when we were staying at the Gluck, it was a, I don't remember if it was a lumber yard. I think it was a big lumber yard where they set us up.
What were the conditions like there?
Well, we stayed in tents, and there were no facilities for basically anything, cooking, or we were just on hold until we were taken away.
Did you have sufficient food to eat there?
Well, we took with us what we took with us, we had, and at that point they said you can eat anything that you get, like whether it was kosher or not. It was, we were told we can have it. Like when my girlfriend brought some food, we ate it. And
Did the people that were your friends and people that were in town know the conditions where you were?
I'm sure they knew, because it was wide open. There was just a fenced-in place. And that's when we could see some of the anti-Semitism too. There were people watching, and some of them seemed quite happy that it was happening. So,
What happened to your father's stores?
my father had to take on a silent, or he was the silent party, that on the outside it looked like it was not Jewish.
So a Gentile came in
Yeah, a
and became
Gentile
his
came in
partner?
and he became a partner so that he could keep his business.
How long were you in Gluck?
We were there the dates seem kind of hard to remember, but we must have been there, I would say 3-4 weeks, because we got there in April. I remember it was right after Passover. It was the last Seder that we had at home. And my uncle, my father's brother, used to come every Passover. He'd come in the morning and had the potato pancakes or the latkes with my father. And that Passover, when he came, they hugged and said goodbye to each other. Because they knew quite well what was happening.
As a child, what did you feel? What did you understand about the conditions and what was going on?
As a child?
I mean, as you were there, you were still such a young child, young person.
Well, I was, it was inconceivable what was happening. I don't think we fully understood that all these things were happening. So when they said you're going to a labor camp, we believed it.
Up until the time you left Gluck, what was the worst thing that you can remember seeing take place?
Well, I think the worst thing is when they took my mother for questioning. The other thing was my father had He suffered from too much acid in his stomach, and he had a lot of pains in his stomach, and there was nothing that we could get for him. That is when there were groups going out every day to the hospital to help out, and I volunteered to go to the hospital because I knew my friend was there, and then she got me some farina, and I brought it back, and then he could eat that whenever he'd get a stomach ache. So as far as getting any supplies or anything, medication or anything right into the place, you couldn't.
And while you were still in that camp was the last time you saw any of your other relatives?
Well, my relatives were not held at the same place. They must have been held at another holding place in the town. I remember when my cousins and uncle and aunt from Poroshko were coming, when they got into Uzhhorod, they got a word to my father to do something to get them out of there. And of course he couldn't do anything. There was no way for him to do anything. That they didn't understand either, I think, that what was going on.
About this, I'm sorry, taking back just a little bit, that cousin, where did they go with you, or did they go with you?
We did not see them until we were in Auschwitz, and then somehow we met one of my cousins who was working in Auschwitz in the distribution center, where they were sorting center, actually. They were sorting all the things that came in from the people that arrived in Auschwitz. And she got word to us that if we can get out of the barracks and come to the place where she was, she would give us some food, not knowing that she's risking our life and her own. We went out early in the morning and met her there, and she gave us some cold cuts and things that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
January 17th, 1996. The survivor is Rene Hammond. Her maiden name was Renee Konigsberg. The interviewer is Judith Richardson Hames. And we are in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the United States. We are conducting the interview in English. When you were getting ready to leave Gluck, can you tell us about what the circumstances were surrounding and how you left?
We just got to the word that they are taking us out of the Gluck Telep, it was called, and we would be taken to the railroad station. We walked, the whole group. We were escorted by Hungarian and German guards. When we got there, we were put into railroad cars, the ones that I guess they usually transport animals and other goods. It was not passenger trains. We were packed so full that there was hardly room to sit down. It was hot and very, very uncomfortable. The trip took us 3 days. I remember some people looking out the window. There was a little window, and they said, it doesn't look like we're going to where, to where they told us we were going. We were supposed to go in Hungary. And some people realized that we're going towards Poland. So they realized that none of the stories that they told us were true, that we're not going to a labor camp. There were some of the railroad cars that people died in it. They were not taken off. They were left until we got to Auschwitz. When the train stopped, people were begging for water. I guess we got a little water here and there.
How?
They would open and put a bucket of water in. And
Were you able to sleep? Was anyone able to sleep?
just sitting down,
And food?
food, whatever we took with us.
And toilet facilities?
That was very difficult because it was men and women and children and adults all in one, I don't know what to call it, one railroad car. So I think what we were doing is hold something around the person that was using the bucket, which was an embarrassing situation. I think we were almost like in a daze the whole time, because it was things that were happening to us that you couldn't even dream about.
Did people
And-
talk?
Oh, I'm sure we talked, yes.
Do you remember any of the conversations?
The big concern was where we are going, because at that point we realized that it's not the labor camps that were promised to us in Hungary, that we're going somewhere else. I guess the younger people like myself didn't know much about the concentration camps, so we were just waiting to see where we are going. My father knew very well where we were going, and people were crying, and it was just an awful experience, just being jammed into a big railroad car like that. Some people got sick, some people, like I say, there were cars where people died and stayed there. There were, from what we heard, there were people who took cyanide with them, that when they find out where they were going, they took it, and that's how come they died.
What happened?
From what we understand, one of my mother had a stepbrother, that's what he did.
What did you see when the cars opened?
When the cars opened, we saw these young men with striped clothes. The clothes was something like prisoners' clothes, and they were pushing the people out, get out, get out, and some of them would whisper that where we were.
What did they whisper?
That you're in a death camp. But they had to be very careful too what they said. Of course, it didn't help any. We were there, no matter what they told us. So they got everybody out of the railroad cars, and we were standing there, and then they started marching us. There were German uniformed men who would, with a stick in his hand, and he would motion for the men to go to one side and for the women to go to the other side. So right off we were separated from our father and from our brother. We were together with our mother. After that separation was done, then they started separating the young people from the children and the older people. Even though my mother was only 48 years old, she was considered old. She was put to one side, and my sister and I to the other side. From what I understand, I don't remember it, my sister tried to go, she tried to go over to my mother's side, and the man pushed her over to the other side. Whoever carried a baby wound up going to that side, even if they were young. If they had a young child, they went with the child. In many cases it was like, I had one girl I went to school with, her sister had a baby, but she carried the baby. So she wound up going with the people that were killed. The explanation was, they were telling us, they said, you're going to take a shower, and we want, you young people can walk, but your parents are older, so we'll take them in a truck, so they wouldn't have to walk that far. Well, that sounded kind of reasonable to us, and we didn't feel that bad that we weren't with them. When we got to the place where the showers were, we had to undress completely. Then they shaved our heads, cut all our hair off. And then they took us, we couldn't take anything. The last things that we were holding on to were pictures from home. We couldn't even take that with us into the shower. We took our showers, and then they gave us these gray dresses. They were like a sack, and wooden shoes. We couldn't get our clothes back at that point. That was all taken from us. And we all looked kind of strange with no hair, a bunch of women without hair, naked. Then we got the clothes, we got dressed, and then we were taken to the barracks. And they said, you'll see your parents later. When we got to the barracks, we were asking the people that were supervising the barracks when we will see our parents. And they were kind of, it's like they lost their feelings. They said, you'll never see your parents, they are dead. And it like hit us like a rock. I mean, even there we didn't know what was happening, that we were at an exterminating camp. And we couldn't believe when they told us that we won't see our parents, that was just a lie, that the other transport was taken to be killed. So we just couldn't quite believe what we were hearing. But as days went on, and we realized that we didn't get to see our parents, that it must be true what they were saying. There was a woman with us. She was an English teacher. She used to give lessons to my sister. and she had an ash fall on her shoulder one day, and she started she was crying. She said, "That must be my little girl." That her ash came to her, and she cried the whole time. She was, I don't know how it happened that she didn't go with her little girl. I think maybe her husband had the little girl, or maybe her mother did. But the way it happened that she survived, she went with the younger people. She was not old, she was a young woman. She just had a little girl about 5, 6 years old.
How close were you to the crematorium that the ashes would fall?
We were not that far away, because when we had word from our cousin who worked in the sorting place, which they called Canada, and we could walk after the when every morning they'd wake us when it was still dark outside, and we'd have to stand in lines, I don't know, 5, 6 deep, and as long as they were. And one morning before they had the count, we snuck out, 2 of us, and we went over there. So it must have been pretty close that the crematoriums were, because we could see the flames. We actually didn't know that they were crematoriums at the time. Later we have seen big piles of bodies that were waiting to be burned, because after they were gassed, they took them out there, they took them to the ovens. And I remember these huge piles.
What must go through the mind of a young girl seeing things that are almost unimaginable?
I kind of think that they were giving us something in our bread. We used to get, every morning they'd give us, first time we got it, we didn't know what it was, because it looked like a rock. And they told us it's bread. And from what we heard, that they put something in it, and they said it's chromium or something that would numb our feelings. I don't know what the truth was, because we were kind of, I'd call it in a daze. I mean, we thought about everything, but we kept calm. I'm surprised that we weren't yelling and carrying on, unless we were so scared that we just did what we were told to do.
And you were with your sister Agnes the whole time?
Yes, we were together the whole time, and 2 of the girls were distantly related to us. They're 2 Roth girls, and they stayed with us the whole time. So we were really help to each other.
What were the sleeping conditions like?
They were, it's hard to describe. They were made out of wood. There was a bottom part and a top part. I would say they were about, each one was, I'm trying to remember what the size was, but there were about 6 or 8 of us in each part, and we couldn't lie down, we could just sit there. So that's how small they were, and I guess we slept sitting up. So they were just like, as you imagine chickens in a coop. It was like a coop for people.
Were you able to sleep?
I don't remember whether we slept or stayed awake. We must have probably gotten exhausted here and there and probably fell asleep. Then to the sound of when they were waking us, so we must have slept some. And that could be due also probably what they were putting into the bread to keep us calm.
What was the interaction between the other women in the barracks?
Well, there was no interaction except the ones that you were directly with in the coop. Now outside, when we were outside, I remember after they got done counting us, it was very cold because all we had is this little dress on, and we would like form a big one next to the other, just holding together to keep warm. But as far as discussing anything, I don't remember any discussions. I mean, we talked, our main concern was whether we should still believe that our parents were not alive anymore, and that's the only thing we could think about. Nothing else was more on our mind.
You didn't work while you were in Auschwitz?
In Auschwitz we didn't work. They just kept us there. It was like a quarantine. I guess before they would take us into Germany, that we didn't have any diseases or something to take in there. And after 6 weeks, then, well, before the time was up, they would have us march in front of German officials, and they would be picking out people to go to these different labor camps. Sometimes we had to march with no clothes on, naked. Other times they let us keep our clothes on. And that's how we were picked to go to Gelsenkirchen, which was a labor camp. We were not there too long when the place was bombed out and the barracks caught on fire. And after that they transported us to Essen, where we were working for the Krupp factory.
What, if you can describe for me, would a typical day in Auschwitz be like?
Well, first they woke us, like I say, it was still dark outside. They called it Zählappell. We'd have to get out and stand in line for, it seemed like hours, but time was like we didn't know. And they'd count us. They'd every once in a while they'd hit somebody if they just didn't like how they looked. Was it reason enough? After that they would take us to, they had these long latrines with one hole next to the other, where we'd have to go, and if anybody would sit there a minute longer than they were supposed to, there was a woman with a whip that would hit them.
A German?
Yeah, German woman. So they only gave us so much time to go and get out. Well, they had a lot of people there that they were in the barracks. They had girls that were in charge of the barracks, and most of the time there were a couple of Germans, but then they had some of the prisoners that have been there for a long time, and they were in charge of some of these, of the barracks. There was one girl that I heard her story, that she has been on the truck that was taking people to the crematoriums 2-3 times, and somehow she would jump off and manage to escape. When I forgot to tell you, when we got to Auschwitz and we were marching to the showers, we saw old people just like lying in the gutters. People with the beards, you know, the old Jewish men and women. I don't know if they were dead or just exhausted from, well, they wouldn't have been walking, they must have been just dead. It was an awful sight to see. I mean, coming out of a normal life and all of a sudden just dropped into a nightmare. And just to think back of it, it's, I don't know how we managed to stay sane.
Were there those that did lose their sanity that you saw?
Well, there was one girl that when we first got to Essen, we had some barracks, I think, and then during one bombing it burned. And there was one girl that never got out of the barrack. And I don't know if she was that sick or did she just lose all will for life. And she died. And there was when we got to Essen, or it was in Gelsenkirchen maybe, I broke out with a rash that supposedly it was scarlet fever. And they took me into a tent where there was straw on the ground. And I was lying there sick with a fever and all the symptoms, earaches and headaches, and I don't think they gave us anything, but the word was around that there will be a transport taking sick people and pregnant women that managed to, I guess didn't show when we got there, back to Auschwitz. And one day my sister came into the tent and she had a big smile on her face. And I said, "What are you so happy about?" She says, "I'm sick too, I can be with you." She was happy that she was sick.
What were meal times like?
We got a hot, supposedly soup or coffee or whatever it was, and a piece of bread. And unfortunately, we had to eat it. We couldn't save it, because if you saved it, somebody could steal it from you. I mean, already people were getting to be like, you would say, animals. It's the law of survival. If somebody has a piece of bread that's unprotected, you take it. Because we used to save our bread. We figured, well, one for tonight and we'll have a piece tomorrow morning. And after they started stealing it, and we started eating whatever we got. Was awful bread, but it was the only thing we could have. In the beginning, occasionally they would allow me to stay in the barracks, I would have to draw from pictures an SS man's wife or an SS man's daughter or children, and I'd get a reward of an extra piece of bread for doing it.
How did they find out you were an
I
artist?
don't know. I don't know how it came out. I think the two girls maybe that were in charge of the barrack they heard that I was drawing, and they wanted me to do portraits of them. And then from them, some of the SS men found out. And so I managed to get a few days where I didn't have to march to the workplace and got an extra piece of bread.
All of this time you didn't hear where your brother and father or your
We
mother...
didn't know anything. The girls that were in charge of those barracks in Auschwitz, they just very plainly said to us, we said, when are we going to see our parents? And they just said, you'll never see them. They are dead. However, my brother and my father weren't. My mother was killed the day that we arrived. But my brother and my father wound up in a labor group that went to another was taken out of Auschwitz to work.
Were there any acts of kindness that you saw from your captors?
Occasionally, they had some extra soup left over or whatever it was, and they'd give it to different people. I happened to be lucky many times because I was small and thin and whatever, and they'd give me an extra bowl of soup. But that would be the only thing that they ever did.
And they never treated you humanely?
No, we used to march in cold, in rain, in all kind of weather to the factories, and there were some Germans in the factory that were working direct for Krupp. They were not SS or had nothing to do with the Gestapo or the SS, and some of them were humane. They'd bring a carrot, they'd bring a potato, and some of the girls, I never got anything from them. So, but I've heard that there were some. Transported.
Today is January 17th, 1996. We are with Rene Hammond, Rene Koningsberg at birth. The interviewer is Judith Richardson Hames. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida in the United States. The language is English. What were the circumstances surrounding your departure from Auschwitz?
We were picked after we had to march in front of the SS men, and I guess there must have been some officials from the factories there too. They would pick out certain ones, and after that we would I guess we were taken by train to Gelsenkirchen from Auschwitz. But knowing, by then we knew that going out of Auschwitz was a good sign, because we were not in the death camp at that point. So we were glad that we were leaving there.
Your sister was with you?
My sister was with me, and the two Roth girls were with us too.
And what happened when you arrived?
When we arrived, they had, I think it was tents in Gelsenkirchen. I can't recall actually that we did go to any of the places to work. It seems to me shortly after we got there, we were bombed, and some of the barracks got on fire, and next thing we knew, we were being taken to Essen to work for Krupp. So my memories of Gelsenkirchen are very vague, because it was a short time. Like I say, we were happy that we got out of Auschwitz.
When did you start work at the Krupp factory?
Well, when we got to the Krupp factory, shortly after we got there, we were taken to work, and there were all kinds of details. Most of the work that we have been doing was cleaning up after the bombings, picking up all the debris and stuff like that. I also was doing some stamping irons. It was a piece of iron and a hammer, and there was a number that I stamped on the iron. That's how it happened that my finger was injured. It seems like a piece of the iron went under the nail, got badly infected, and they had like a kind of not a hospital, but a place where they took people, and they were telling me that they'll cut my finger off. However, they didn't. They just did a bad cut on it where the finger never was the same. And that's when I stopped drawing too, because I couldn't use the finger, it was, just a crippled finger and very painful. But the work was hard, because it was mostly younger girls that were doing it, and this was picking up heavy pieces in wheelbarrows and taking it from one place to the other. It was in good weather and bad weather, was very cold, and if there were these ovens that they had, I guess I don't exactly know what they did with the ovens, but if any of the girls would stop at an oven to warm up for a minute, she'd get the whip. She was not allowed to warm up. Being we had no facilities for keeping clean, I remember our hair started growing back. It was still very short, but we would wash our hair like in any little puddle that we would see, and walk around with frozen hair. The walks were long and tiring.
What were the living conditions like in Essen?
At the beginning, we had these barracks, but then when they bombed and the barracks burned out, We were like in an underground type place, like it wasn't a basement, maybe it was a shelter that they used at one time, but they didn't use it anymore. And it was damp and it was wet, it was dark, it was terrible. And that's where we stayed. We used to go out of there, and when they were bombing, all the SS men went to their shelters to be protected from the bombs. I remember a few of us going outside and just watching the bombs fall. It was like a 4th of July fireworks, because there was just fire in the sky. And we really didn't care if it hits us or not. We didn't mind the danger of it, of being there and watching it. Of course, the SS men used to tell us that the bombs were meant for us, that the British and the Americans knew we were there, and that's why they were bombing there.
Did anyone believe them?
Of course not. But there was next door to us, on the other side of the fence, there were some Russian and Ukrainian prisoners of war, and they were hit. I mean, it was that close that they were hit, where a lot of people died. Yet on our side, we were saved from that death.
Was the food any better? Was it more plentiful now that you were working in the factory?
No, the food never was plentiful or any different. It was the same type of food. The only normal food is, like I said, there were some Germans that worked in the factory that would have if they had a garden, they'd bring a carrot or a piece of celery, potato, and give it to some of the girls. And I remember at one time when I was sick, they would bring, whoever got something, they'd bring it to me to make me, but I had no appetite. I didn't eat it anyhow.
What kind of hours did you work there?
We left, they counted us before we left in the morning, and it was still dark. And we came back, it was dark again, so must have been long, long hours that we were there. And
how many prisoners versus how many Germans were working together in the factory?
It's hard to, I would almost say there were more prisoners than the workers, because they were mostly supervising of what the prisoners were doing.
Were they at all reasonably good to you? Were they kind to you, or were they also vicious?
There were different ones. I, in a way, was lucky when I got into the stamping, because I was inside at that point, whereas all the other girls were outside in the bad weather, because these factories had so much damage to them that there were no roofs over it where they were working. And there were stories, and I've seen where they would hit them, and like I say, if they stopped for a minute at the ovens, or they would report them to the SS. So some of them were bad, but not all of them. Some were much nicer than the others. In fact, there was an older man where I was working, and once in a while he would give me a little piece of his sandwich. Of course, one day he came and started hugging me, and I pushed him away, and that was the end of my little sandwiches.
Did you?
But I've seen some that were not as bad as the others. And the one that used to bring the carrots to the girls turned out to be a real good man.
During that time that you were there, did you know what they were making? Did you know what they were doing?
Not really, because originally the factory was ammunition. But like I say, the girls that worked, most of them, as far as I knew, were just cleanup crews. The stamping of the irons, I had no idea what I was doing. To this day, I don't know what I was doing.
So no one tried to sabotage or?
No, because I don't think we were actually involved with the manufacturing end of it. It was mostly cleanup crews.
Were you with your sister and the same girls throughout most of this time?
Yes, yes, they were all with us at that time.
And were you aware that the war was coming to an end?
Well, like the one man used to say to the girls, some of the girls, he said, if you escape when the end comes, I will help you. And there were some French prisoners of war on another side of the camp. And I guess we kind of knew that it's coming to an end, but not exactly when it would be. We hoped it was soon, and we were at one point planning that when we know that it's coming to the end, that we would try to escape, because the word was getting around that soon they would be taking us back to one of the exterminating camps, that before the war ends we would be taken back, and we didn't want that. So we were planning what we would do, and it seems to me that somehow we managed, somehow we got some civilian clothes, and that's what we were going to use to, I don't even know how we got the clothes, whether everybody got some regular clothes or...
Who was the man that offered to help?
He was just a Krupp factory worker that told one of the girls that when the end comes, he says, I'll help you.
And who were the girls that were planning this?
Well, it was the two of us, the two Roth girls, and a fifth one, Rosa. She is actually the one that has talked to this man. His name was Reinhardt, that knew that he would help us if we escape. So the five of us were planning it. And the way it happened that we took Gisela with us is I had a bad finger, very infected, and she was working in the sick room. And we figured she would have bandages and things, so we confronted her, would she want to go with us, but bring lots of lots of bandages to take care of my finger. And she was very happy that she would have the chance to escape from there.
Tell me about the actual escape. How did you actually pull it off?
We knew from being outside many times when they were bombing that when the bomb started falling, the SS guards would go into their shelters and wouldn't come out till it was all over. So we knew we had some time during the bombing where we could actually walk out and they wouldn't be there to catch us. So one night when the sirens usually came on, so we knew that there was an attack on the city. And we said, well, this is the time we go. And we just walked out. There were gates that were usually under guard, but there were no guards. And we walked out, and we started walking towards the place that he told the girl approximately where he lived. And I remember some of the Germans were coming out of their shelters, and they saw us, or they were going to the shelters, and they saw us walking, past it, and they said, "Is it over? Is it over?" And we said, "It's almost over," or something. We answered them and we managed to get to a place that was. It happened to be a bombed-out Jewish cemetery. There was an old building in it that the caretaker must have lived in it. And we couldn't even see how to get into it because it was dark already. And we just went from the opening down. We hit water because in the rain the water got in there, and we went down there, found a dry place, and we sat there next night. We said, well, it's time to go and let Reinhard know that we did escape. And
how far was this from where you were being held?
We walked quite a bit before we got there. The funny part of it is that we found out later that it was right close to the Krupp factory where the cemetery was, and where we were hiding. And the two girls went out to look for him, to find him, to see if he would help. Somehow I remember seeing when we were marching to and from work, one of the men walking into that one building, and that's how they found him. And he was kind of in shock when he realized that we actually did it. But he said, yes, I will help you. And he used to bring us boiled potatoes. Each one of us got a boiled potato, and he brought us water. And occasionally he would forget the water, then we wouldn't have water for the whole day till he came the next time. He would keep informing us that it's getting closer. One day it seems to me, I said to the girls, this spot right here doesn't seem too safe. Somebody could come down and find us here. Let's go to another part of this basement. Well, we moved over there, and that night there was a bombing, and the other place was caved in. It was like a miracle that we happened to move from that spot to another spot, and it just caved in. And then one day there were some Russian prisoners of war working around there, because this is all bombed out areas. And this German guard came down there looking for some of his prisoners. I guess he couldn't account for some of them, and he found us. He says, what are you doing here? And we said, well, we're from, I don't remember what town. We told them that we were from a neighboring town, and we were bombed out from our home, and our parents are looking for a place for us to stay. And he looked at us, and he said, you're not some of those prisoners. And we said, no, we're Germans. He left. And when the man came that night, he said, you're not safe here anymore. We don't know how much he really believed you. He could come back. So he said, I have to take you somewhere else. He took us, I think, first to a little cottage that he had where he had his garden. And we stayed there. There we heard a lot of shooting already, so it was getting pretty close. And at that point he said, well, you're not too safe here either, because you could be killed by the shooting. So at that point he contacted some of his friends. He had a friend who owned a grocery business, and he asked him if he would help out with the girls that were hiding out. And he says, yes, I can put up 4 of them. And then there was another man who said he can put up 2. So he took us to his house, where he gave us a room for the 4 of us, the first time that we actually were in a house. And we could clean up, we could wash. In fact, we burned some of our clothes because, well, we had lice. I mean, we had no way of cleaning or anything. And there was a little stove and we set it on fire. We put it in there and burned it. And he gave us clothes. He found clothes for us.
And he was a German?
He was a German. He was a very religious man. He says he was never actually a Nazi. And he had a housekeeper because his family was in an area where there was not that much bombing going on. And to us, whatever she cooked was like out of this world. And they treated us very nicely. And we stayed with him until liberation.
Were you able to trust people, or were you...
Well, we kind of didn't have a choice. At one point, when the man didn't come with food, we said, maybe we should just go back to the camp and get shot. And some of the girls said, no, I'd rather die of starvation than being killed by the Germans. So we had to trust him. He also had some Russian prisoners of war that were in and out of his house. He had some Germans that were defecting that he helped out. So he was helping a lot of people. And like I say, what choice did we have? He said he would help us, and we never went out of the house. We were in the one room hiding, and nobody knew we were there. And we just felt that he was a good man, and we trusted him. We had to.
Were you ever able to see him again after the war?
I never went back to Germany, but one of the Roth girls visited him, and that's how we kept in touch. And he died shortly after. Didn't live much, to...
How far apart were you from the other 2 girls?
Not too far, but we didn't see them because we were not getting out of the house. When the liberation came, from what I understand, they both went back to Hungary. They went into a camp, and from there, home.
Now, where were you when you were liberated? Were you still at that home?
We were still in Essen, living at this house. We, at that point, we were informed that it's that we're pretty safe going outside, And I remember my sister was out and she saw a man in a uniform, and some of us were taken back, and she said, that uniform doesn't look like the other ones did. She says, he must be either British or American, and sure enough, he was an American. And then when the Americans were marching in, we went out and we were waving and welcoming them, kind of. And the Germans were looking at us and yelling, you know, that we were traitors. I mean, we were welcoming the the enemy, not realizing that we were not Germans. And we started asking for, is there anybody from Czechoslovakia, and is there, you know, trying to find people that we could talk to.
Was there a time close now that the fear started to leave?
At that point,
Yes.
well, when we realized that we're being liberated.
But you weren't afraid that there was something more after that, because it seemed there were so many things happening?
I guess there was always that fear that something can go wrong. And that's the reason we didn't go back home either, because we were still afraid. We'd have nightmares. One of the nightmares that I experienced is walking around with nothing on. And, you know, being chased, and it was just, but we got over it. I think one of our good lucks were that the Germans didn't come into Hungary till 1944. So it was only 1 year that we had to go through this. There were people that had it ever since, 39, 40. In Germany it happened much sooner. In Poland, in some of those countries, it was a lot worse.
You can ask one more question if you want.
Did you know some of those people that were there from 39? Were you ever in?
Well, when we were in Auschwitz, there were people there that were there for a longer time. Somehow they managed to survive right there. And later we have met people that were in Theresienstadt, which was the sample camp. If the Red Cross was checking on anything, that's where they took them. So we have met some of them. It was mostly German Jews, or Czechoslovakian too.
One with her apart, and then
It does get hot.
yes.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Today is January 17th, 1996. We are with Rene Hammond, who was born Rene Königsberg. The interviewer is Judith Richardson Hames. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the United States, and we're conducting the interview in English. After the liberation, how did you live?
After the liberation, we contacted the British military government and asked them if they had any work for us. Two of us got jobs with the military government, and
Which two?
it was Elizabeth Roth and I, And I'm trying to remember now where my sister, and my sister got a job with the UNRWA, which was United Nations Rehabilitation Organization, I think. And we were doing translating and interpreting for different people that came in, because there were a lot of displaced persons in the town. They supplied us with a place to live, and we got some of our food at their mess hall.
What about rebuilding your family? How did you find out?
Well, we contacted the Red Cross, and we were searching to find our family, because even though we were told that they died, we didn't want to really believe it, and we tried to find them. We actually didn't know where, like my brother and my father went to a different area, but we didn't know where they were. We didn't know if they were alive, but we hoped they were. My brother got very sick after liberation. He was in a camp, and he got typhus. He almost died. When he recovered, the Red Cross was going to take him to Sweden for recovery, and he said he doesn't want to go there until he finds out what happened to his sisters. He went into camps, and he found the girls that were in the same camp as we were, and he asked them about us. They were told, when it seems like after we escaped and they counted the girls, they found that there were 6 missing. A day or so later, they told the girls that we were caught and we were shot. So they said, as far as we know, they are dead. And he said, well, did anybody see them dying? Because that was not the German way. If they would have caught us, they would have taken us back to the camp and shot us in front of the others to set an example. So he didn't believe it. He kept going from camp to look for us. And he came to one camp, and he contacted this woman who was in charge of the camp, and he says his English was almost nil at the time, but somehow he got through to her that he had 2 sisters. He gave her the name, and he says, wait a minute, there's a girl by that name who's working for us. And she took him where my sister was. So that's how he was reunited with her. It's almost like a miracle among that many people. And he happens to go into talking to one who knows my sister, and then they notified us, and we were in contact after that. And he never did go to Sweden. I guess after he met us, he probably didn't want to go.
And is that when you learned that your father had died?
That's when we found out that he didn't make it from him. He never went in, it was years and years where he would give us any details of what happened. He basically couldn't talk about it.
Were you able to talk about it after the war?
For a long time, I couldn't talk about it. I kept it in. I was also, I think, very mistrustful towards a lot of people. That how would they treat me, being Jewish, or what would they do? So I guess I still had that a bit of a distrust for a while, but also it was too painful to talk about it. It was like we couldn't. If I'd start talking about it, I'd cry, and I'd just rather not talk.
I heard you refer several times to things that appeared to be miracles. How did the Holocaust experience affect your faith, your religion?
I was really kind of following in my parents' footsteps when I was growing up. And I was losing my faith. I could not believe that God would let that happen to people that were good people, because my father and mother, but my father he would have taken his shirt off to give it to somebody. So I just, for a long time, I just lost a lot of my faith. Slowly, I guess you get back with it. You're in danger, and you say, "Oh God, help me," because you were brought up with faith in God. You try to figure out what happened and why it happened, but then you realize that there are good people and bad people through ages, and it has nothing to do with God. God doesn't tell them to do these things. It's what they pick to do. And to pick the right way is up to the individual. You can't blame Hitler on God.
Why do you think you survived?
Sometimes I ask myself, I'm sure that there were a lot of people who were a lot more deserving than I was, and they died. And God only knows why He saved me.
Do you relive the experience even now?
Not as often as right after it happened, but every once in a while, even now, I have a dream that's like a nightmare, and I wake up and I'm all right. But like my experience with the 4th of July when I got to the States, I thought it was bombing when they were doing the fireworks outside. Then I was informed by my husband that that happens every 4th of July, and it's not bombs. The United States has never been bombed, fortunately. Definitely, yes.
From your experience, did you or do you still have carryovers for someone who had so little to eat for such a long time? Are you very careful with food now, or do you sleep in a different fashion? Do you sleep more lightly, or do you have more difficulty with sleeping?
No, I think I was fortunate enough that I am pretty well recovered. I mean, as far as food, I'm not wasteful, because there were times that I didn't have. I remember when we were in the camps, and we would say, I don't know why my mother didn't cook boiled potatoes. They are delicious. Why did she fix them any other way? And we said, if we ever just have a room and a bed and a table, that's all you need. You don't need anything else. We were just that when we get liberated, if we have 2 dresses, one to wear and one to wash, that should be plenty. And these were our plans, that when we get out, we wouldn't need much. Why have a lot of rooms in a house? All you need is one room.
Is there anything that you wanted to share with us that I didn't ask? A good experience, a bad experience, or something that I may have overlooked?
There will be probably a lot of things that will come to my mind after you leave. I think the fact that we had the courage to escape was very fortunate, because when they were taking the people back, who knows, we were in such bad rundown condition by that time. I've gotten sick a couple of times while I was in camp. It's questionable if I would have made it. So I'm very glad that we could do that. And sometimes you have, when I think back and I say, could we have maybe somehow gotten our mother to the other side? We couldn't. But you keep asking yourself, would there? But we didn't know what was going on either. If we would have known, maybe we would have wound up with her, or maybe we could have done something. But we believed the stories that they gave us, the lies. Because I think we lived basically a very sheltered life at home. Anything bad was kept from us. Even though I was 18, I think my mother and father looked at me like a little girl, not like somebody who is pretty well grown up and still going to school. And so we really lived, we were not out in the real world yet. We were still at home.
I imagine the scars from being naked and having your head shaved and using the toilet in front of people would have also left their mark for today.
It was one of the worst experiences for us. I mean, I shouldn't say the worst, because when we see somebody being hit and abused is very bad, but to be exposed to be treated like basically animals. We didn't have any identity. We were just not a human being. That's hard to get over when you're treated like that. I'm going to introduce part of my family that live in Florida. This is my granddaughter, Rachel Sutliff. She's 14 years old, almost 15. This is my grandson, Jason. He's 8 years old. And their mother, Robin, who's my daughter, my fourth daughter. And she's a wonderful daughter to me. My husband, Ralph, for 48 years.
Come, mate.
And our new baby, Tippy.
I think my grandmother's a very special person, and I'm very glad that she's sharing this so that it won't be forgotten.
I love my mom and my grandma very much, and they're both wonderful people.
I'm very fortunate to have my mother and to share this part of her life with her, that we live so close together, and I feel very blessed for this and for my wonderful mother.
The only thing I can say is one time one of my sisters asked my father who his favorite daughter was, and he pointed to my wife without hesitation and said, Renee. My sister got a little upset, but I felt great. What are you going to say?
Your Holocaust experience that you want them to remember you by, that your great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will look up and say, Omi, or that's my Omi, and listen to what she said. Did it make a better person out of you? Does it make you more understanding? Whatever you want to say.
That's me?
That's you.
Look right here.
And look, tell me what you want to give as a message to your grandchildren and the children of the world in 60 or 70 years.
The message to
Wait,
my
you ready?
the message to my children and all people is that they should learn from the past, and that they should make sure that this could not happen, that prejudice is very bad, no matter who people are prejudiced against. I'm also very happy that we have the state of Israel now, because if we would have had a state when these things were going on, we would have had somebody who could speak for us. As it was, nobody was really interested to save us. So I want my children to know if there's any way that they can help to keep Israel going, and mainly that they should always be good people, and they should never do to others what they don't want them to do to them. If they follow that, I think they will be good people. I'm going to introduce my family, my sister.
Well, I'm sorry. That's not the motorcycle.
Oh, God.
Okay.
I'm going to introduce my family. The first one is my sister, Agnes. She is a wonderful sister. We have been like friends, not just sisters, from as far as I can remember, and we still are. Next one is my mother, who died in the concentration camp. To think back of her, she was the most devoted mother I can think of. We came first with everything. My brother lives right here in the St. Petersburg area. We weren't quite as close because he's a boy, but we think the world of each other. My father, I couldn't say enough of him. He had a heart like gold. I remember he came home once with a prayer book, and my mother said, "What did you buy a prayer book for? You have a lot of prayer books in the house." He said, "Well, I don't remember the man's name. He wanted to borrow money from me, and he gave me the prayer book to hold until I pay him back." And my mother said, "You know he'll never pay you back." He says, "Yes, but by accepting the prayer book, it made him feel that I do trust him, and I will, that it wasn't just a handout." He wanted to make the man feel good about asking him for money. So like I say, he was like a saint. And that's why I could never believe that it would happen to him, that he should have died, that he should have lived.
tell me when it looks smooth, okay? Because it's hard for me to think about it and do it.
And tell me if it's smooth. It's a little fast, but it's smooth.
Okay, I'll slow down. That look all right? Okay. Because see, they can.
Well, we've been together, even in the concentration camp. We stayed together. We were fortunate. So we had each other, and I think that helped us to survive, because from what I understand, people that were alone didn't have as much of a chance. They didn't have support from each other. One of the examples how much we felt for each other is when she came into the sick barrack and she was happy that she was sick just so she could be with me.
What did your father do at his store?
He had a he was the silent party at the time, because Jewish people were not allowed to own businesses at that point. So he had a friend who manufactured furniture too, and he came in as a partner and the front man for him, which was nice. We didn't go back, so we didn't get anything. From what I understand, some of my cousins, when they went back, they confronted this man who was the partner, and I don't know what they got out of him. We were not interested in material things. We wanted to get out of Europe, and whether there was anything left or not, we really didn't care. My brother worked in my father's store. He acted with us sometimes like he owned it. If we came in, he says, "What are you looking for?" But we didn't pay any attention to that. I give him a lot of credit that he didn't believe that we were dead, and he kept looking for us until he found us. I think my father's last message was, "Find your sisters and help them." And he did that. He took it the way it was said. And I admire him for it. I mean, we looked for him too, but we just looked through the Red Cross, whereas he actually went on the road trying to find us. The first one, going from the right, is my husband, Rav. We've been married 48 years. We survived so far. The next one is my oldest daughter, Yvonne. She has 2 children, Brittany and Aaron. Brittany had a bas mitzvah a few years ago, and Aaron had his bar mitzvah. So they are raised in the Jewish faith. Patty is the next one. This picture is at the wedding of her daughter, Dawn. She has 3 children, Dawn, Eric, and Heather. They are all wonderful children. The next one, I'm in the middle. I don't want to say too much about myself. My daughter next to me is Karen. She has 3 children. She has a master's in psychology. Her oldest son will be bar mitzvah this summer, and she's a wonderful daughter, like all of my children. Robin is the next one. She's going to school and raising 2 children. She's going to be a physical therapist. She has a daughter, Rachel, 14, and Jason, 8. And the last one is my son, who was the last one. He's the youngest. He was supposed to be a doctor, but he's a fisherman in Alaska. And he's a very good son to me, too. They are all wonderful children. I laugh about it sometimes. I say, my son, the doctor, is fishing in Alaska.
Gone fishing, doctor is out.
He came back a couple of times. Once he fell in, and I guess it gave him enough of a scare, because you fall in Alaska, you have a couple of minutes to get back
Really?
out. And the funny part was I had a mother's ring, and I lost a stone, his stone. And I didn't hear from him, and I was worried and worried. And finally, when I heard from him, I said, Gary, I was really worried about you. And he says, what happened? And I told him. He says, well, Mom, I almost died. He says, I fell in.
Okay.
It was either going overboard or being squashed by the ropes.
Wow.
And he made it, and he says, but that, can you imagine
Jeez.
that?
Talk about omens, right?
Yes.
Wow.
When he told me, I just, yeah. But he came back. He was going to do other things, and
Oh, damn.
Alaska calls him.
Are you starting to tell us that he has to be quiet?
No, I'm just breathing.
It cooled off a little, though.
Now,
This is an old picture. Tyree is the baby, and today he's 13 years old. He has a little Indian outfit on him, and that's the reason his grandfather is so proud of him. But I'm proud of him because he's going to have a bar mitzvah this summer, and he's being raised Jewish, following in my footsteps. My husband is Cherokee from North Carolina. They lived in Pennsylvania. His parents moved from North Carolina to Pennsylvania because they had a son who was a mute, and they wanted him to go to school, and that was the closest school. They were very good people, and when I came over, they were really nice to me. And Ralph is a chief, Cherokee chief, which he's proud of. This is a picture from my niece's wedding, and it just shows you how 3 survivors of the Holocaust, what their children and grandchildren are. It's my brother and his wife, my sister and her husband, and I and my children. From left, it's my sister in the blue dress, her daughter Debbie. Behind her is her husband Craig. Next to him is my grandson. Next to Agnes is her husband. Then there is my niece, her husband, and grandchildren. There's the bridegroom, who's almost 7 feet tall. And am I supposed to talk?